Gentlemen, can you please join?
Winfried's getting everybody.
Right. Winfried is having a meeting. Aki, can you help us?
We're going to put Aki to work.
Come on. I'm noting the names of those who are late. Winfried was having his own meeting. Okay. So we'll start. First, I want to officially thank Mongolia for the present they made, which you see in front of Andrew. It shows how international we are, and tomorrow we will study the proposal of them becoming an affiliated member to IFHA. So I would like to start the afternoon with the presentation of Andrew Chesser that will show you a review of the current economic trends in breeding and racing for year 2012 and the beginning of 2013. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a privilege to work with the IFHA Executive Office this past year, and the transition from observer to active participant could not have been done without the kind assistance of our Secretary General, Dominique de Wenden, Dr. Roland de Vols, Ms. Martine Gaudron, and of course our Chairman, Louis Romanet. Additionally, a great deal of thanks is owed to Aki Akatani, who put the foundation in place for the IFHA Executive Office to succeed after his departure. It is good to see Aki with us here today. With that said, I consider it an honor to follow in Aki's footsteps to present the racing and breeding statistics gathered for 2012 and a brief outlook on 2013. Horse racing is truly a global sport that makes important contributions to the global economy and society as a whole. As racing authorities, it is vital that we make this point known, both regionally and internationally. It is essential that this economic data is at our disposal, especially when presenting information about our industry to decision makers, legislators, and commercial partners. Before presenting the statistics, I would like to take a moment to personally thank all of you. Throughout the summer, contributions from the International Studbook Committee, IFHA Committee Chairman, and member countries allowed us to publish the 2012 data on our website and produce the hard copy annual report, which has been made available to you here at the conference. Not only does the annual report contain the latest racing, breeding, and betting statistics, including a regional analysis, but the report also details IFHA membership, a summary of each committee's activities, and a list of the 2012 top racehorses as ranked and categorized by the World Ranking Supervisory Committee. Now on to the statistics. For the year 2012, global breeding activity continued to decline. The number of covering stallions, mares bred, and foals born each fell from 2011 figures. The number of stallions that covered mares in 2012 declined approximately 12%. The total number of mares bred declined 11%. And the number of foals born declined approximately 4%. This continues a trend. Over the course of the past 5 years, we can see that the total number of stallions covering mares has dropped approximately 11%. The total number of foals born has fallen 14%, and the sharpest fall has been the total number of mares bred, down 27% since 2007, most of that being realized in 2011 and 2012. Declines from the largest breeding countries, most notably the United States, Australia, and Argentina, have been a large factor. But this is not isolated to countries with bigger breeding populations. Decreases can be found in almost every area of the world. But when you take a look at the number of races worldwide, you can see that the total has remained relatively steady the past few years. leveling at just over 160,000 in 2010, 2011, and 2012. In 2012, the United States led the world in the number of races run, at just under 45,000 in total, followed by Australia and Japan. A full list of the top 10 can be seen here. When looking at the average number of runners per race, one clear trend in 2012 points to the concentration of the largest field sizes per race in one area of the world. 9 out of the top 10 countries, as ranked by largest average number of runners per race, were found in the Asian Racing Federation. In fact, of the 17 countries surveyed that are members of the Asian Racing Federation, all but one reported a field size that exceeded the 2012 global average of 9.4 runners per race. Looking at the average number of starts per year, the global average in 2012 was 6.3. The countries seen here comprise the top 10 of the 51 countries surveyed, and only 4 member countries, Chile, Mexico, Panama, and Peru, who are all members of OSAF, reported runners averaging more than 10 starts per year. Now, looking at prize money, we see a number that has seen steady growth over the past few years, and in 2012, we see a total that surpasses 3 billion euros globally for the first time since the IFHA started keeping this statistic in 2005. It is welcome news for owners. You might think it would be only countries with larger prize money pushing these increases, but actually, many countries outside of the top 10, as ranked by number of races run, saw double-digit percentage increases in prize money. Mauritius realized a 41% increase from 2011 to 2012. Saudi Arabia, Uruguay, and Oman all realized increases of just over 20%. Serbia, Mexico, and Bahrain saw growth between 14% and approximately 16%. Morocco, Brazil, and Tunisia all saw a rise in prize money between 10% and 13%, and the list goes on. And it's fair to say that the pool of prize money has never been larger and has never been so diverse on a global scale. Delving now into the total global turnover, we see that the number rose to over 95 billion euros in 2012, a slight increase year over year, approximately 3.4%, and I'll note that this actual growth was determined at comparable inflation rates. The top 14 betting countries accounted for approximately 96% of the total global turnover in 2012, and in fact, the top 6 betting countries accounted for just over 80% of the world's total turnover: Japan, Australia, France, Hong Kong, Great Britain, and the United States. Now, an early look at 2013 reveals a continuation of some of the trends reported in 2012, but there are also some nuggets that give cause for optimism as the industry adjusts to new challenges. In North America, the Jockey Club has reported fewer mares bred in 2013 and a downward revision to the 2012 and 2013 full crops, 2011 full crops. But early indicators in parimutuel handle and prize money show some stability. In addition, the success of boutique race meets, such as Saratoga, Del Mar, and Keeneland, showed the demand for best racing. And additionally, recent returns from the completed Fasig-Tipton and Keeneland sales revealed the demand for quality bloodstock. In France, for the first 9 months of 2013, the PMU has reported an early indication of a slight decline in betting turnover, just 1.4%. And for the first half of 2013, the JRA has noted that turnover is steady, showing a slight increase of 0.4% over the same period in 2012. The number of races scheduled is identical to 2012, and the attendance is slightly up at 1.6%. And the British Horse Racing Authority released a comprehensive economic report on British horse racing. While a number of key indicators trended downward in the wake of the broader financial crisis, it was concluded that British racing has a core expenditure of £1.1 billion and a total economic impact of £3.45 billion, and continues to be the second best attended sport in Britain after football. The Hong Kong Jockey Club reported a 12.3% increase in parimutuel racing handle to a record 94.37 billion Hong Kong dollars, and noted that more than 2 million people attended racing in Hong Kong during fiscal year 2012-2013. And in Ireland, despite a reported decline in turnover, there has been reported growth in bloodstock sales, slight increases in attendance, an increase in prize money, and in the announcement of the inaugural Irish Champions Weekend for 2014. So how do racing authorities not only meet, but innovate in the wake of changing and sometimes trying economic environments, both locally and internationally? Racing authorities should continue to examine fixture dates to best handle the smaller foal crops of the past few years in order to maximize field size and ensure a quality product for bettors and fans. Pattern and graded stakes committees should continue to keep a close watch on breeding and racing figures and adjust pattern races accordingly to ensure the quality at the highest level remains consistent when compared to historical trends. Racing authorities must take every step possible to maintain the integrity of our sport and the health and safety of our athletes. We must convince and reassure the wagering public that our sport is conducted fairly, safely, and uniformly. But I think the soundest advice would be to continue to look to our customer, keeping them the central focus at all times. How can we provide a better on-track racing experience? How can we develop a better racing product for our customers to wager? As long as we keep customers at the heart of each decision we make as racing authorities, we will be well prepared to adapt to any challenges we face, and our breeding, racing, and betting will thrive. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Andrew. As you saw in these figures, which you have in your file, on your desk, you have the annual report, which was produced for half the cost of last year through the American Jockey Club and printed in the United States. So that was good news for us. And thank you to Andrew. But please check all the data. And if you find any figures who doesn't look to be the right one, there is already, as I told you this morning, one correction for Australia. But please let us know if there is any other correction, because all the data was directly put by you in our database, and it's not always easy to check it, especially with the change of the ratings between the different currencies. So now we will move to our first session. As you know, our team for the afternoon is developing and promoting international competition. And the first session will be a very important one on the challenge of international movement of horses. As you know, since it was initiated by my father in 1967, this conference has been dedicated to trying to find the ways to encourage the international movement of horses, to take care of quarantine regulations. And since IFHA has been created and I became the chairman, I've been also doing all my best efforts to encourage this movement of horses, which is important as long as there is a level playing field around the world and horses can move easily without spending hours in quarantine, like it can happen in some occasions. And so our top man for dealing with these issues and the vice chairman in charge is Winfried, who has a great experience, both when he was some years ago CEO of the German Racing Authority and now of Hong Kong. And he has made a very important work, and we have the great honor today to have also Dr. VALLAT, the Director General of OIE, CEO of OIE, who is a very important person, and listen to him very carefully. And Dr. Brian Stewart, with the chairman of the International Movement of Horses Committee, to deal with this question. So now I will give the floor for the session to my vice chairman, Winfried.
So good afternoon. I think it is a very valuable topic, I think, just after lunch, in a way, the movement of horses. only one thing in relation to my name. There was Engelbrecht. I'm not a relative of Engelbert Humperdinck, or I think if there would be any a question. If you look in a way, a brief outline, what we would like to cover today is, first of all, to give you a perspective of the volume of horses who travel in different categories. Then, in a way, macro analytics about the segmentation of movements. What are the commercial drivers? Because I think it is not only in a way that we talk about the movement of horses for their own sake. There's a clear, in a way, focus why it's commercially, we think, really relevant for the racing industry with the globalization of the racing industry. Looking, in a way, a little bit at practical examples where we have issues. And I think what we focus today is more a little bit short-term and medium, because I think we have significant other issues we would like to cover, but we want to do it step by step. What we think is necessary is definitely to tackle these issues systematically, is a much closer cooperation engagement with the OIE, which we think is of key strategical importance. We think it's necessary to work closer with FEI, because we're facing similar issues. And I would like later to introduce our speakers, which were panel members, which we are really grateful, especially to Dr. VALLAT, to make his time to give us the honor to be here. Looking now at the annual volume of horses who, in a way, travel, if one looks at really the top class horses, the groups level, we have around 1,000 horses per year who travel. So these statistics we have pulled together from different sources, so I think they should be fairly accurate. If one looks then at the second category, the temporary movement of horses for breeding purposes, shuttle stallions, mares, is around 2,000. If one look at temporary movement of horsemen, which are on the non-group level, so we have around 6,000, and permanent relocation movement of horses, we are in the region of 16,000. If one looks now at a macro analysis and the segmentation of movements, where we look at what's the volume, what is, in a way, time critical, which especially for the horse racing side is extremely important, and what is the regulatory environment. If one looks at the temporary movement of horses, we can see from this statistic that it's a low volume, but very, very high value, especially if you look at a race meeting, which we will examine later in different categories. If you see how important, in a way, these horse movements are, we can see this a little bit better. The same is for the breeding side, where you, in a way, for the breeding side, we have a low value, but significant values if you look at stallions who go around the world. There is a certain time criticalness, but as far as not time critical as it's, we think, in the, especially in the thoroughbred international horses side. Then we have temporary movement of in the so-called non-group category, and there's a high volume, a significant volume. The majority of these movements are between countries which are in close proximity, which allow a free movement of horses between them. There's a so-called tri-party agreement between England, UK, Ireland, and France. We have a lot of movement between New Zealand and Australia, within North America and the general EU. The permanent movements, I think, there is definitely a much higher volume, but I think we see in a way that therefore, in a way, we have more issues in relation to potential welfare implications, adverse media reactions, perceptions. So I think we have to be, in a way, very alert of this. Coming now, in a way, to give you a perspective, in a way, what I think is important in relation to the commercial drivers. If you look at the commercial drivers, it is very clear that the cross-border movement of horses contributes to the size of the fields and the quality of fields. We can see that further, in a way, that we think we, as IFHA, really encourage the participation of horses around the region. And it really creates significant media value if you have international participation. It's very important for the public interest. It is very important for sponsorship. And if horses stuck in quarantine, that could create, in a way, significant discussions, in a way, why, in a way, horses, in a way, cannot participate more in a global level. We see, in a way, that, especially with globalization of racing, with commingling, with simulcasting, that this is key in a way. If you have horses who move, especially across countries, across continents, that this is in a way a significant driver for interest, and especially for, in a way, the commercial side of commingling and simulcasting. And last not least, what is fitting very well in the presentation we had heard before is the quality control. Because the more exchange of horses you have, the more, in a way, valid is the different ratings. So we think, therefore, even when it comes to assessment of group races, for example, in a continent, it's very important that one has really in benchmarking where you see where horses can travel and really perform against each other to really, for the selection and the quality control, we think it's extremely important. It gives you now a little statistics about how many international horses movements we have, and especially if one looks now at the top races around the world. This statistic definitely will change after yesterday's ARC. But I think it shows in a way, for example, if you look at the top races like the Champions Stake in Ascot, where from 6 runners, you had 2 who coming from overseas, 33%. And the Breeders' Cup Mile, interesting enough, has 22%. But I think if one would look then even more, what are the intercontinental runners? Then I think you see in a way how in a way the statistic even more become impressive. Not because I'm in Hong Kong, but I think if you look at the Dubai World Cup, for example, where 54% of the horses who participate in this event coming from a different country. And if one looks at our races, for example, the sprint, we have 33% of the horses come from overseas. The Hong Kong Mile have 50% of the runners from overseas, and the VARs 83%. So one can see, especially for these intercontinental meetings, the movement of horses is very important. And if you look at the opposite side, where you have countries with significant prize money, with significant attraction, being at Japan, where you have a significant exchange in the Japan Cup, but other horses which are open, there is no overseas horse coming. And if you look at Australia, there is especially an issue that besides the Melbourne Cup and lead-up races, you have practically, in a lot of the top races in Australia, no international participation. And this is, in a way, what we embrace a global world. We want to really push, in a way, the globalization of racing. So we think that's a significant issue. So what are the issues? So who are affecting adversely the international movement of horses? There's a lack of harmonization of the conditions. We have the movement of horses will rarely qualify as temporary, but I think for me, in a way, if one looks at one key issue, which we, when we analyze the problems, is that we have stipulated periods of pre-export and post-arrival quarantines, which are required for the temporary movement of horses. And the country's capacity to attract international runners significantly reduces if you have too many issues with horses coming into a country, going into a pre-quarantine, then going in another venue. So every time you change, in a way, the condition under which horses train is really not enticing, in a way, this that you bring your horse there. And in a way, what we discussed, we as global racing industry, we want to build an international circuit with top-line horses participating in the group races in a number of different countries before returning home. I quote now only some very specific examples. If one looks, for example, new participants, like a country like Qatar, there is, or Korea, who has now staged their first international race. There is, in a way, if you look at the European rules, where you have a 90-day rules when horses are out of Europe, to these countries it would not apply. If one looks now at the circuit we have created, if horses go from the Arc de Triomphe, they may go to Japan, they go to Dubai, they may follow on to Hong Kong, to Singapore. We have at the moment, in a way, practically, that then they use up the 90-day rule. So then, in a way, they have to go back practically to Europe to restart it. So that is some issues we see, which we would like to address and not necessary to reset the clock. we have, in a way, we discussed this similar if you look at the autumn races, international races, and the UAE. So I think this is a practical issue where a lot of times trainers are a little bit hesitant or they have to take their horses back, which is not definitely enticing. Australia, I mentioned before, is definitely a big issue. We are really grateful that, in a way, we have been able to reduce, in a way, the time in our horse cannot be practically be out by a week. But still, if you look at a minimum period of 4 weeks, it is a significant, in a way, handicap. And this is not attractive, in a way, for horses moving, in a way, even Australian horses coming to international races and going back. One takes them out of the circuit for too long, so that is an issue. What we think is a systematic approach, we thought it was very important that we establish a direct link, a direct voice with the OIE, which I think is recognized by the World Trade Organization as the World Animal Health Organization, and is responsible for setting the health standards and for the international trade of animals. So we had practically an indirect link, but we think, in a way, with the globalization, it was really of key strategic importance to have a direct link. So we are, in a way, we are grateful that we are have really now practically 2 pillars in place for the trade of animals. One is the agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and the agreement of technical barriers to trade. So under these agreements, the OIE standard is the basis for the quarantine protocols under which the members can use to protect against incursions of animal diseases. Because at one end, we would like to really encourage, in a way, the movement of horses. At the other hand, the local horse population and the disease control is definitely something which is of ultimate importance. So in July 2013, we signed the agreement of that we're an affiliated member of the OIE, so joining the World Health Organization and the World Trade Organization, the World Veterinary Association, the International Federation of Animal Health, and the Fédération Équestre Internationale. So we have now established these very important connection, which enable us really to have a direct link and a direct talk about the issues we have and can make our voice heard. The other issue we think is from importance is a closer cooperation with the FEI. The FEI, in a way, as an organizer of the equestrian competition, has similar needs if it comes to the transport of horses. And I think for an international organization like the OIE, it is very difficult. You have at one end maybe voices coming from the Equestrian Federation, the FEI, who would like to do certain things. Then we have established and certain protocols. So we think, in a way, it would be good that we try, in a way, to align our interests, especially if it comes to the top-level competition and the participation of international participants. The FEI has invested substantially into the enhancing of the capacity for high-performance horses to move internationally. And they have created the first private-public partnership, which I think is something we, in a way, think this was a very good start, because in times where budgets become very, very tight in a lot of jurisdictions, in a way, probably, maybe not always, horses, race horses, equestrian horses are on the top agenda of our friends in government. So we think, in a way, that we therefore, with this private-public partnership, which the FEI has established and which we, in a way, would like to follow, that this is helpful, in a way, to develop, in a way, the globalization of horse racing further. We think that with coordinating efforts relating to the international movement of horses, we can really both leverage on our respective strengths and avoid the risks that we have separate discussions with the OIE, which could be confusing. We would like to explore even going further, because it's not only the transport of horses, the movement of horses, we think is of relevance to the equine industry. If one looks at sports competition, I personally think that we have a lot of common interest, and so we would like to discuss tomorrow if we would form a confederation, the International Horse Sports Confederation, which would we create a formal vehicle between the FEI and the IFHA to really discuss matters, and it comes from animal welfare, etc., so that we have a much more systematic discussion than only on a piecemeal. And I only can say from my experience when I was in Germany, where we had this confederation between the authorities in relation to horse racing and equestrian, it was extremely effective. It was, when it came to discussions with government about animal health, welfare, etc., a united voice with gravitas, I think, is much better than a separate approach. So we think in a way, therefore, that it will be beneficial to both. One of the issues we clearly identify too, it is very good to talk about things, but I think if you want to make things happen, then you have to put resources, what you want to achieve. So we need an increase of resources, which we think it's necessary. So what was put in the budget there as 5,000 euro, I think that was probably only a marker. We have to really look systematically what we, in a way, and how we want to achieve it. I would like to appreciate very much the support we get from our colleagues from Dubai, where Dr. Anthony Kettle is the IJFA representative in the discussion with the OIE, and this was provided from our friends in Dubai. Furthermore, I think we think it's necessary to fund experts if it comes to discussion in the International Movement of Horses Committee for the plenary session. And we have, in a way, funding for Dr. Pratish Ellis, who is one of the advisors we have in the International Movement Horseman Committee. So we will look at other projects. We will then identify, and we will do this diligently, and look what are the underlying programs we think it's worth funding, because I think we have to be, with our resources, mindful how we apply them. I would like now, in a way, to hand over to our panelists. And again, I would like to really welcome especially Dr. Bernard VALLAT, who is the Director General of the International Epizooties. I only can say he has a very, very well-established background in a number of countries, in Central Africa, in the Indian Ocean. And Dr. VALLAT was appointed the Chief Veterinary Officer for France in 1995. From 1999 to 2000, he held the post of the Chairman of the Terrestrial Animal Health Code Commission of the OIE. In 2001, he was elected the Director General of the OIE. In 2010, Dr. VALLAT was elected as the Director General for a further 5 years mandate. He holds several honors, honorary titles, notably the Officier de Légion d'Honneur, as well as from other countries. This afternoon, Dr. VALLAT gives us an insight into the mission of the OIE and the OIE's current agenda as far as the movement of horses is concerned. And I personally think it's very important that we hear a view from the authority part of view, not only what we want, because I think that's very important to understand in a way what the steps are, and not only thinking what we want, because I think life is never a one-way street. Furthermore, I think I'm glad that my former colleague, Dr. Brian Stewart, who's the chairman of the IJFA International Movement of Horses Committee, is here. He currently is the head of equine welfare veterinary services at Racing Victoria. He was with the Hong Kong Jockey Club for 10 years, was looking for a new challenge, and he was before in Singapore. In 2008, Dr. Stewart has been appointed as the chairman of the International Movement of Horses Committee, and this afternoon, Dr. Stewart will explain the core role of the International Movement of Horses Committee and the constraints which we face regarding the movement of horses and the potential addressing these issues. So thank you very much, and I would like to welcome Dr. VALLAT in a way to give us a view from the OIE. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
And this is a green for...
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting our organization to present you the problem of horse movement. It's a great honor for us. My objective is to build or to reinforce the relation with your organization in order to decrease the burden of movement of horses worldwide and to allow more countries in the world to participate in the competition, in the horse competition. And this is relevant for any sport linked with horses. I will start with the introduction. The concept of international alliances, the perceived constraint to international horse movement, the issue specific to the race horse industry, the height health, height competition population concept, and the conclusion. And I fully support the diagnostic made my predecessor. I will try to propose some treatment after the diagnostic. So the mandate of our organization is to prevent animal disease from spreading around the world, and our current strategic plan extends our mandate to improve animal health, veterinary public health, animal welfare, and consolidate the animals' role worldwide. You know that animals are more and more attacked, mainly because of environmental problem, and we try to use scientific basis to justify the link between men and animals. Our organization has been created in 1924, so before United Nations. It is why we are not part of United Nations. And we changed our name from Office International des Epizooties to World Organization for Animal Health in 2003. Our headquarters are in Paris, but we maintain 6 regional representation and 6 sub-regional representation in all continents. We have currently 178 member countries, but we expect more soon. So only very small islands in Caribbean and Pacific are not yet members. We have offices in all continents, so we are permanent staff and representative able to support the implementation of any agreement with region and countries. Our governance is classical. It is a World Assembly of national delegates, national representative, deciding on all policies by resolution, voting resolution, one country, one voice. We have a council elected by the World Assembly. The Director General is also elected by a secret ballot by the members. We maintain a technostructure in Paris and in our offices, but we use elected commissions in different topics linked with our mandate to propose standards for adoption to the General Assembly. And we have also regional commission to take into account regional specificities. And we have a global network of 274 reference laboratories and collaborating centers worldwide. They provide us all the scientific input we need to prepare the standards. And of course, many of that laboratories cover horse diseases. And our standards are adopted by our General Assembly, one country, one voice, and this provides strong legitimacy to that standards recognized by World Trade Organization, as my predecessor said. The procedure of presenting new standard leading to their adoption is fully transparent and democratic, and it leads to the adoption by vote. And all members can provide a proposal for new standards, and particularly also organization having an agreement with the OIE, and it is the case of IFHA. So you can at any moment propose to change an existing standard or to create a new one, and your proposal will be immediately examined by our relevant bodies. The cycle of adoption of our standard is relatively short for an international organization. In average, it is two years for final adoption and publication. It is important to recall that our members' country have a binding obligation, particularly to notify their disease situation in the most timely and transparent way, and to provide information on the follow-up of any relevant outbreak until a solution has been found for solving the problem. All our members are now online for that purpose of notification and follow-up of disease events, and we have a web interface open to the public to have the transparent information provided by members. We have still some members a little bit reluctant to be fully transparent, but in parallel we have a tracking system. So we follow, thanks to specific software, all the media worldwide to know if something happened. Immediately we take contact with governments when something is not clear, and this is efficient. We have different categories of equine notifiable disease. Well, first, we have a list of diseases for which we provide to countries an official status of freedom. This covers, for example, foot and mouth disease for sensible species, cattle, small ruminants, etc. Peripneumonia, the BSE, PPR, peste des petits ruminants, classical swine fever for pigs, and for the first time our committee accepted to provide to the international community the official status for African horse sickness. I think it's a good step that our committee accepted to take that disease as in the list of disease for which the OIE can provide the official status. Because historically the interest of our member for horses was low, comparing to animals raised for consumption. So we try now to put horses on our agenda as an important species, and I will explain how we are doing. So we have also the system of self-declaration of the status, disease status by our members, and we have now provision for that, for Durin, equine influenza, glanders, rabies, West Nile fever. And we have also in our code is the compendium of standard for disease control method and trade. And we have a provision in our code for control methods and condition of trade for the list of disease you can see there. And of course we are open to change the existing standard or to add new topics on your request, on the request of our member countries. for building solution for your objective of facilitating competition horse movement, we use the concept of international alliance. And that new concept started with a memorandum of understanding between FEI and OIE, followed after by a memorandum of understanding with IFHA. That has been strongly facilitated by a grant provided by FEI to the OIE. And this grant was very important to convince our member to put horses on the top of the agenda. Without that grant, our member did not consider horse movement as a priority, because we have a great pressure for many other topics and sanitary crisis worldwide to solve. So FEI really has been very useful on convincing our member thanks to that achievement. And Priscilla Sayar, the president of FEI, accepted also to be a goodwill ambassador for our organization and to communicate with the public on the interest to promote animal welfare and animal disease control worldwide. So I encourage your organization to follow this very good example. So engagement in a public-private partnership to address movement concept is key on the building of that progress. Now, international movement of race and FIE competition horses within the EU and between EU and selected approved third country is already facilitated. But, as you said, challenges exist in country and region not governed by these current regulation, and we have a great pressure from many countries to provide solution for that. Regularly, we receive application from new countries such as Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, etc. They would like to do more and to access to a status allowing to organize more competition open to the world. So we need to address that question at global level, and OIE is able to propose global solutions. So what are the perceived challenges to travel internationally currently for any horse for competition? There is application by many countries of excessive and inconsistent sanitary regulation. So we need to harmonize the behavior of country on the basis of science-based standards, and we need to convince everybody to respect that standards. And OIE is dealing not only with standard applying to horses, but in all animal species and animal products. It is why we have a large scope for our negotiation with countries, and the implementation of standard for horses can take advantage of that negotiation covering all animals and products. There are different approaches to the modality of quarantine, on the laboratory testing, even the use of the different tests. We are harmonizing also the test used for any disease, including horse disease, and we must convince our members to respect the commitment they adopted for that in that topic. There is in many countries a terrible lack of knowledge, of skills, of interest, and often a very low priority for horses. And that situation should be improved mainly by communication and international negotiation. There is a lack of national regulation for temporary importation. In many countries, there is only one regulation, applying for horses for the life, not only for horses coming for a short period. This is also very important to convince countries to adopt specific regulation for a short period of presence of animals in the territory of the country. And race horses import follow permanent import regulation in some important countries, still in developed countries. So issues specific to your industry, IFHA has a structure in place to provide a framework to support the high health status horse concept. The high health status horse concept is a list of conditions to be applied for a very specific population for which we should negotiate specific conditions for international movement. And that condition should be easily controlled by the importing countries and by the national authorities of the exporting countries, thanks to very detailed public-private partnership and agreement. There is a racing circuit well established. This, of course, facilitates the movement, but as we said, we have a strong demand for extension of that classical racing circuit. We have also your current list of events, and it is very useful to start with negotiation on the destination to be selected first, but I understand that that list could be extended soon, and we need to adapt our standard to that evolution. This is the same you presented. So what are the proposals for the facilitation of the competition horse movement? First, we have in OIE standard a lot of existing standards that could be easily applied to that population. We have a list of 11 equine diseases specific for horses, and 5 for multiple species disease affecting not only horses. So this is an existing standard. We have a member of reporting obligation for that disease, and this is very useful before taking decision on authorizing movement of horses. We have the concept of zoning, disease-free zone, and compartmentalization, which are already defined. We have standard on animal identification and traceability, easily applicable to horses, and it is possible to negotiate any details on that obligation for identification. We have global model health certificate. It is not necessary to renegotiate. They exist. They can be adapted. And we have standards on the quality of veterinary services, and we have a tool to evaluate the compliance of the veterinary services with international standards. Of course, quality of veterinary services is a key condition for any exporting or importing country to trust the certificate signed on the health status of the animals. What is compartmentalization? Because it's a key concept to solve our problem. Is establishment in a country, establishment and maintenance of a subpopulation of animals with a specified disease-free status. The implementation of that concept could allow to have healthy subpopulation able to travel even if other parts of the horse population are not free of one disease. We are using that in other species. So based on sound, the compartment concept must be based on sound management and biosecurity measures, and could be conceptually applied to the HHP horse movement, considering a subpopulation of horses with specific condition able to be accepted by importing country under specific condition, less stringent that condition applied to all horse population in the country. And if identification, traceability, management, and the biosecurity condition are in place, that subpopulation could be recognized. And of course, this concept must be based on a national public-private partnership between an industry, a national industry organization, and the government, the body designated by government, and the industry should accept to be controlled to see if industry respects the commitment of the compartment. So this would lead in all countries with a national horse population with a general population, a population of sport horses, and within the population of sport horses, an HHP subpopulation benefiting from specific conditions for international movement. The HHP subpopulation should comply with a basic principle. First, a health status based on commitment on a list of vaccination, a list of regular tests, condition for quarantine, and a health certification, specific health certification for movement. That population should demonstrate that it is a high performance population and she is specialized for competition. And this will be not for all the life of the animals. This population, of course, should be clearly identified using an harmonized system acceptable by all importing countries, using existing standards. And that population should be permanently submitted to biosecurity measures in order to prevent any infection from the environment in the country. The operationalization of that proposal has been made first by meetings of experts starting to develop that concept, and of course industry, FEI and IFHA has been represented by Dr. Anthony Kettel, Dr. Kenneth Lam during the building of the concept during several meetings, and that expert group has currently a 3-year work program until the achievement of our common project. So, based on the OIE standard currently under development, thanks to the proposal of that group, of course the group will make proposal, but we must submit to our elected commission because they propose the standard for adoption, and then we must receive the green light, the final word of our General Assembly. And we have only one meeting a year in May in Paris. So importing countries that are hosting international equestrian events or horse races are advised to develop temporary importation requirement. This will be an OIE standard asking all members to do that if we adopt that concept. To reduce the pre-export quarantine period to a very minimum or not to request at all. This will be an obligation of country if they accept our proposal. Recognize the biosecurity level at the venue or race course to be equivalent to post-arrival quarantine if biosecurity measures are applied in line with the OIE provision adopted by the countries. And finally, it is also very important, it is in a parallel discussion, is to establish a equine disease-free zone at the venue where necessary. Many countries would like to host horse competition events. They cannot do that because they have an infected status. So the concept is to allow countries under very, very strict conditions to establish a disease-free zone, more or less with 10 or 20 kilometers with specific measure for vector, etc. And this has been successfully implemented for Asian Games in 2010 after a certification made by the OIE. And many countries now are applying for this kind of OIE recognition. But I think if we vote a standard on that, will be easier for us. In conclusion, clear socio-economic benefits can be gained for expanding the height competition population horse industry, also in non-classical country region, not only in the classical country, because the vision of the OIE is global. We cannot privilege a region comparing to another one. There is a demand for OIE standard to support safe international movement of HHP horses for any competition, and the subpopulation is designated to participate in both FEA international competition and IFHA group graded races. It is clear that our partners will be FEI and IFHA. We cannot deal for many organizations for that kind of negotiation. And of course, we fully support what you propose to make a link, a clear link between FEI and IFHA. This would facilitate all we would like to do together. Veterinary services are a key partner at national level, and they must comply with OIE standard in quality. And we must convince all governments to make appropriate investment to maintain quality veterinary services able to be trusted when they certify something. So this is key also in our project. At national level, regulatory service should work with industry organization linked with the OIE, IFHA and FEA, and formal agreement should be signed between that authority and national representation of your organizations when possible. And that development of standard for that category of horses should be linked with the generic standard of the OIE, and we will adapt that generic standard for that purpose. For us, it is not a big challenge. One of the big challenges is to convince our members that this is important. And for the moment, this is progressing well. And of course, the common denominator for any decision is science and not politics. Thank you.
So Brian, thank you.
Thank you, Winfried. After what seemed a very exciting proposal and introduction by Winfried and Dr. Vallat, I come along and perhaps be Mr. Negativity in some ways, because we do face very significant problems in achieving these outcomes we desire, which is the safe and the convenient movement of racehorses for international competition. Our group basically has as its mission to facilitate safe and convenient movement of racehorses. Those two objectives are not necessarily consistent. only safe movement or the only safe zero risk approach to moving horses is not to have any movement. It's all about risk management. So, coming from an Asian and Australian background, countries that have been hit very hard by diseases caused by international movement, I think there is a natural caution to becoming too adventurous. So, we need to find that balance, and that's what we hope to achieve. Winfried's identified quite a few of the issues that need to be tackled, as has Dr. VALLAT, so I'm not going to go over them again. Needless to say, they are priorities for our group. And I'm going to perhaps speak about how we more generally approach those areas. So, sorry, I might just go back. We do face significant constraints. We, as an industry, don't control the protocols under which horses move. National governments control those movements. And they have a responsibility to protect not only the racehorse population, but the horse populations in the rest of the country. And while thoroughbreds are very important in Australia, there are huge numbers of other horses and other interests that must be looked after, as there are in many other countries. It's a fact of life that government veterinarians are very risk aversive. They have not much to gain and a lot to lose if they're too adventurous in authorising movements. So we have to understand that. And another factor we have to understand that in many areas of the world, equine infectious disease expertise, as Dr. VALLAT mentioned, is quite limited. It's limited in many developed countries as well, because it's a relatively small area and it's not an area that's very well financed. There are also logistic problems associated with movement of horses, and it actually is quite difficult to get flights to get horses to where you want them to go. While it's not a strictly veterinary problem, it is a very significant constraint, and it's one that we work with shipping agents to try and overcome in various ways, but it is a very significant limiting factor. But we can do something. As an example, Australia does have very restrictive movement guidelines. Winfried alluded to that. At one time it was a total of about 5 weeks quarantine for horses coming to Melbourne, which really was a very significant deterrent to movement. We wanted to reduce that as best we could, and while perhaps we only achieved a 20% reduction, it was something. But the only way we could achieve that was to provide input to the Australian government risk assessment of movement, and where there were unanswered questions about what the risks were, we as an industry, or Racing Victoria, took the decision that if we're going to get some answers, it's up to us to try and provide them, because nobody else would do it. And perhaps nobody else should do it. So we funded a study into equine influenza, the value and benefits of vaccine and diagnostic testing, and if between those two factors we could reduce the quarantine period. And as it turned out, we were able to do that, and it cost us perhaps $60,000, but achieved a permanent change in the protocols. And I think that's something we, as an industry, have to look at if we want governments to look at improving movement of horses. We have to provide the information for them to make those assessments. Another area there, which is a very, I guess, soft area. It's not a hard outcome, but the development of personal relationships is really very, very important amongst racing authorities. There is a tremendous value in knowing who you are dealing with when horses move to another racing jurisdiction. There's tremendous value in being able to pick up the telephone and talk to someone you know about what is going on. And that many people say the greatest value of the IMHC is that building of relationships and building of trust between members that allow us to be confident in each other and to develop ongoing relationships with government veterinary authorities and the OIE, so that they know what they're dealing with, basically, and that's been very, very useful. We also perhaps need to provide examples or models of best practice. Inevitably, international races require quarantine or isolation, which is a subtle difference, but management of that quarantine facility is critically important, and I know from my experiences in Singapore and Hong Kong and also in Victoria that it takes considerable time for people to get into the mindset of isolation, to become familiar with the protocols, and to develop or to deliver effective quarantine management. And in many places that management is up to the racing authority. It might be audited by government authorities, but the racing authority must deliver that service. And generally it takes about 3 years to get good at it. It's followed that model very consistently wherever I've been. So the IFHA, or the IMHC, sorry, can help that by providing models of best practice, and we see that as an important task, an ongoing task, but a very important one. Just the slide I skipped ahead, but we do have to help ourselves, I think. I think to sit back and rely on governments or universities or whatever to provide us with the information that we need to provide input into risk assessments is not going to serve us well. We have to be proactive on that front. And as I said, the quarantine isolation is essential and inevitable. We might like to think we could do without it and horses could move easily all over the place. It's not going to happen. That's just... I don't think any national government authority will accept that, but we can deliver excellence in isolation and training management with good facilities and good people. I mentioned that equine disease, infectious disease expertise is limited. It's an area perhaps we need to look at addressing as well. Not sure what we can do, but again, as an industry, we benefit from the outputs of researchers, and perhaps we need to provide a little bit of input there to make sure that the work that needs to be done to provide a scientific approach to decision making is done. Some old reoccurring problems. It is risky to travel a horse long distances. There's no question about that. The figures have been fairly consistently that you can expect about 1 horse in 20 to get quite sick after travelling. It's improved dramatically now, and in general, veterinary practitioners are pretty aware of the issues, but that's something that needs to be developed worldwide. So that's an area for developing expertise and providing education. Again, a role for the IMHC, I think, in some respects. Not strictly speaking a movement issue, but harmonisation of medication policies is a very important thing. We touch on that if you're travelling to a different jurisdiction and there's different medication policies, it becomes very confusing. So we also touch on that area. Now, Dr. VALLAT just described the high health, HHP, I think it was called. There is no question that elite athletes have a much higher health status, a much better monitored health status. Their vaccinations are up to date. They're monitored by their veterinarians and trainers extremely well. So they deserve, I think, special attention. But if we look at that, the equine influenza was introduced into Australia by shuttle stallions, and I imagine the owners of those horses also imagined they were a very high health status as well. So it's not quite as simple as that. I was very interested to hear Dr. Vallat's presentation. It's the first time I've heard it described like that. And it is doable, I think. I think it must be done, and that will be a main task for us to tackle as an industry. So we do think it's a great idea, but obviously performance alone or group status or whatever is not a sufficient basis on which to create a subpopulation. It must be supported by many other regulations, procedures, protocols, and we have input into that development. But the things I think for the racing industry we'll be looking at is trying to develop some high health status premise, that while individual horses may not be able to be guaranteed to be of high health status, if the premise is not secured or compartmentalised, as was mentioned, the idea that performance alone is enough to guarantee a horse's health status is just not scientifically supportable. But I think places like Hong Kong, I think places like Singapore, the entire racing complex is under such strict monitoring. The health status of the horses is very high, very strict controls, very good biosecurity. It would be very easy to compartmentalise those complexes and free up movement within that system. May become more complex in other parts of the world. I've been thinking about how I would try and apply it in Australia, and I guess it can be done on a premise basis. If a trainer wished to have his premises somehow certified as being of special high health status, there would be means to do it. That would be compartmentalisation, as Dr. VALLAT mentioned. It would take work, it would take effort, but I think the benefits could be quite significant. And I think we must develop our own biosecurity framework that will allow our industry to do that, and that will be a key or a major issue to be discussed at our upcoming meeting in December in Hong Kong. So we'll be looking at how we can apply this compartmentalised concept to our own industry. In some places it'll be easy, like Hong Kong and Singapore. In other places it will be a lot more challenging, I think. Yes, that's our main task, so it should be interesting. Our priorities are very much addressing what Winfried discussed earlier. Those problems there, they keep coming up year after year, but we keep making, I think, some slow and steady progress towards achieving that. And as I say, there is a very good reason that slow progress is made, and that governments are very conservative because the risks of getting it wrong are extremely high. So I'll close there. Winfried?
Thank you very much. And any questions, or everybody's convinced in the room that's the right approach? Any questions? Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is directed to Dr. VALLAT. This concept of high health, high performance subpopulation is a very attractive one, and plainly it's something that we must set ourselves as the goal. Could you give us an example? You said that compartmentalisation takes place in other species. Could you give us an example of what's been developed in other areas?
Yes, for example, when United Kingdom was hit by avian influenza, the production of high-level genetic of chicken was able to create a compartment isolated for any external risk of infection of the plant, of the production unit, by integrating all the input of the production, including the feed plant, and securing all introduction, any potential introduction of virus by external vectors. And this was useful for bilateral negotiation for international trade. So it is applied also in Chile for pork production. Some very important unit of pork production, and this is accepted by some commercial partners outside. But as said, the premise is key, because the owner of the horses must demonstrate that all equipment are made to avoid introduction of pathogen, and this is a very complex technical discussion with the authority. And as soon as there is technical agreement, of course, the certification can be made, but that certification must be reinforced by regular controls by the authority. So this is the concept.
Any further question? This is not the case, so thank you very much. Again, a big hand for panel members, and thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Vallat, for your presentation and for attending that meeting today. And thank you, Dr. Stewart, for all the work which is done. So I would like now to move to the presentation of the keynote speaker, my friend Nick Nicholson. I've known Nick since 1989, when he became the Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the US Jockey Club. During 11 years, he contributed to its modernization and represented his country in many international meetings. I always listen carefully to him, and I can guarantee you that he knows what is mutual respect, because he applied it during all his life. In year 2000, he became President and CEO of Keeneland Association, and it was for him a great and highly successful challenge. It is one of the top-class companies in our worldwide industry, whether you look at its sales or its racing activity. Nick also helped to form the NTRA, the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, and served as its first Chief Operating Officer. He is currently the chairman of the very successful Equibase company. Just one memory of our social life. In 1991, we had a meeting in Kentucky, followed by an international golf team competition. By 0 degrees in cold winter, the winning team was composed of Nick Nicholson from USA and Christopher Foster from Great Britain, and the losing team was composed of Cairo Sullivan and myself for France, and we lost by 1 shot at the last hole. The competition was followed by a big dinner in the breeding shed at Lane's End Farm, with a trophy presentation by Winfried to the winning team, but also another one to the losing team, which is engraved as International Classic Outstanding Achievement of Louis Romanet. And I am not sure it was the truth, at least on the day. It is still in my office at France Gallo on the 6th floor, and it always reminds me that the social aspect of international relations is as important as the professional one, and that Nick became one of my very good friends. So let's now listen carefully to Nick's views on our industry, and maybe he can also tell us if he has improved his golf handicap since he retired.
Thank you very much, Louis. I'm honored to be here. This is the most important gathering of racing authorities in the world each year. There's no question about that. And I have great respect for all the institutions that are represented in this room. This has been an amazing weekend. And I'm thinking this morning that I'm very glad I don't have to be in the room when Bertrand puts the staff of France Gallo together and begins to plan next year's conference. How in the world you're ever going to beat this year's conference, I don't know. Saturday night was spectacular, beyond spectacular. And yesterday was one of those days where if you're a racing executive, you know how much you have to balance. And they balanced everything yesterday. The horses were great, thousands of happy fans. You had a happy local jockey colony, a happy local trainer colony, a happy local breeder colony, and yes, the sponsor went home very happy as well. So congratulations to France Gallo, and I'm sure that I can speak confidently for everyone in this room to thank France Gallo for its hospitality all weekend. It's just been marvelous. Thank you very much. Louis was right. I have been doing this for a long time, and he's also correct. If you were listening carefully a few minutes ago, he said that his father started the international movement concept in an organized way. He also founded this conference. And I was fortunate enough to know Jean Romanet. I was a very young person just starting out in the industry. And I was striving to learn more about racing and breeding internationally. And I was of no importance and I was of no particular relevance to Jean Romanet. But Jean Romanet was very unselfish to me, and I found out later many, many other people as well, in sharing his knowledge and his experience not only in French racing but in international racing. And his passion was contagious. And I've always been very appreciative of the fact that he was so tolerant of, when I look back at it, my naive and very simplistic request of him. He was particularly tolerant of me, and for which I will be forever grateful. And as time marched on, his son, Louis, took up the reins of this conference and of the IFHA. And to no one's surprise, the conference and the federation have not missed a beat. They continue to grow and thrive. And among the many reasons I have such admiration for Louis is he has never wavered and never tired of the importance of this important mission of the IFHA. There is no question that every person involved in thoroughbred racing anywhere on this planet owes a debt of gratitude to the Romanet family and to you, my dear friend Louis. Thank you for your unwavering leadership through all of these years. I was very fortunate and honored to have had the privilege of serving this industry for 33 consecutive years. In some ways it seems like a long time, and in some ways it's the bat of an eye. First, I was with the thoroughbred breeders organizations in Kentucky. I learned to look at the industry from the point of view of the person trying to breed champion thoroughbreds. Kentucky, for those of you who have not been there, is a very unique place because many of the farms and many of the horses that are raised on those farms are actually owned by people trying to win the great championships of the world. So the breeding industry there is not so insular as is frequently the case. I realized early that a global knowledge of racing and breeding would be extremely beneficial. I also became aware that a global awareness of what's going on around the world can and should be used to improve all local racing and breeding programs. I'm a great believer in that much progress can be made simply by copying others' ideas. First draft I said stealing other ideas, and realized that this distinguished body I should probably say copy. After 10 years I joined the team at the Jockey Club of the United States. It's sometimes called the Jockey Club of New York, but I'm from Kentucky. We don't call it the Jockey Club of New York, we call it the Jockey Club of the United States. And at the Jockey Club I learned to look at the industry from the point of view of a stud book authority. It was a very exciting time to be part of the stud book authority. The beginning and evolution of blood testing, and then as it evolved into DNA testing, the improvements in the registration which allowed for online naming, and that was a great day, online registration. It was a very exciting time. And I was fortunate enough to be able to serve on the International Catalog Standards Committee and the International Stud Book Committee, and I was a participant in this conference during many of the years in the 1990s and made several presentations to this committee on the important and sometimes controversial issues of the day. And with each of these experiences came the reinforcement that those of us involved in thoroughbred racing and breeding throughout the world, in some ways, we are all very similar. And in some ways, our cultures and our traditions are not so similar, but rather very different. In the year 2000, much to my surprise, I was selected to become the president and chief executive officer of the Keeneland Association. As Louis said, Keeneland is truly an industry treasure. It is a private company run as a business, but with an industry-based and community-based mission. No stockholder of Keeneland has ever received a dividend. The Keeneland mission, in fact, is virtually unchanged for decades. The mission is simply to conduct racing of the highest quality possible, to conduct thoroughbred sales with the highest integrity, to maintain our grounds in a manner that they are a showcase for the industry and our community, to foster, protect, and promote thoroughbred racing and breeding, and to support community projects and organizations, primarily educational and charitable groups. This is a successful business model that has worked well for over 77 years. Keeneland is the largest thoroughbred public auction company in the world and is also a race course that conducts quality meets in April and October. We just finished arguably the second greatest weekend of racing in the planet this weekend. Keeneland's September yearling sale has just concluded. The gross sales were over $280 million. The average was up 17%, and the median was an all-time record. So clearly, they're doing very well without me. Approximately 50 countries have involved as buyers in the Keeneland sales. People come from all over the world to buy the horses that are sold at Keeneland. And having an ongoing business relationship with thoroughbred owners from all these different countries is very broadening for all concerned, both ways. For example, the pedigrees of stud books around the world are improved. The genetic diversity of the breed is helped by new outcrosses in breeding. But perhaps more important is that we are able to keep up with the successes and the challenges and the problems and the goals of racing jurisdictions all over the world. And that alone makes it invaluable. I hope that, while I'm on the subject, I hope that everyone in this room will someday have the opportunity to visit Keeneland. I love doing tours. My wife says that if I could do anything I want to, I'd be a tour guide at Keeneland. So I'll be happy to show anyone around the grounds at Keeneland. So I have been very blessed to envision, to learn this industry from various points of view, from the breeder to the stud book authority to a racing executive and to a sales company executive. And each step along the way has increased my awareness and my appreciation for all of our many similarities and also our differences. I firmly believe, despite all this, or perhaps because of all this, that at our core, it is so important that we help each other succeed. Improvement and positive developments for racing anywhere benefits all of us everywhere. Last month represents the first year anniversary of my retirement. And in all candor, I have indeed been more involved with our first grandchild. I have a whole string of pictures if anyone wants to see tonight at the dinner. She's a rather average child, but I'll be glad to talk about it. And Louis is correct, my golf game is much better. My handicap is going down, and I hope that it will continue to do it. So I have not been so much involved in racing regulatory matters. So I make no claims to be up to date with your deliberations. And so the only reason I'm standing here today is that perhaps after 33 years of being in the trenches, constantly involved with the crisis du jour, A year away allows me some perspective that I would not have had a year ago. Looking back on the journey, so to speak. I use the terminology journey purposefully, for I have come to understand that thoroughbred racing, whether from the point of view of a regulator or a stud book authority or a racetrack executive or any of the other important roles represented in this room today, is indeed a journey. This journey is simply a continual quest for improvement. At our best, it is a passionate pursuit of excellence. There's no total final victory. There's no finish line. Wherever we are in this journey, we must strive to improve. We can and we should be proud of our progress, but we should not allow ourselves to ever become complacent or self-satisfied or find ourselves diverted or stalled in our quest for this improvement. I have found that the type of person who is attracted to thoroughbred racing, we say racing in Kentucky, racing here in France, frequently savors this quest for improvement. This can be both a positive and a negative. We always strive to improve. This is good. But we frequently are hard on ourselves and others when progress is not made with the speed and the philosophy that we desire. And a neutral observer might say fairly that we are also frequently very fond of our own opinions. I am sure that I certainly was, and probably much more so than I should have been. Looking back, I also must admit that one of my many weaknesses was that I was so focused on the problem areas that I was slow to appreciate when real progress was made. In our passionate quest for improvement, we are always focused on the next challenge and not so much the last one. One example of worldwide cooperation benefiting all in this industry is found in the history of the International Stud Book Committee. In preparing for today's program, I reread all of the ISBC minutes and during those 38 years. It was exciting reading. But there were many, many examples of cooperative action leading to positive results during the time of that stud book meeting. And I knew the subject matter right before I spoke. And I thought that it would be very appropriate to pick out this one example and highlight that none of what we're talking about today would have been possible without the work of the International Stud Committee, positive results through the years. A few minutes ago, I mentioned without elaboration that yearlings, and I could have added brood mares or even weanlings, leave the Keeneland sales grounds and make their way all over the globe. This is a common practice today. And for the most part, it goes without a glitch. The commerce generated through this worldwide traveling traffic of thoroughbreds can be measured in the billions of dollars through the years. Most of this commerce would never have even been possible without the approved stud book system put in place by the ISBC. This is all taken for granted now. It is just assumed. But I assure you, years and years and years of hard work went into creating the framework that is used today. At one of the very first meetings of the International Stud Book Committee, its chairman, Christopher Weatherby, stated, and I quote the minutes, "The agenda for this conference covered a wide spread of subjects. Some were straightforward, others were controversial. Nevertheless, he hoped that the delegates would agree that the basic theme of the conference should be unity, and they should be prepared to see and to understand each other's point of view, and try to reach agreed, sensible decisions in what would sometimes be very difficult issues." End of quote. I firmly believe that embracing this foundation of mutual respect serves us well And it's as relevant and as important today as it was in September of 1978 when Christopher Weatherby spoke those words. While acknowledging these accomplishments of the ISBC, it is important to note that just as the Romanet family has nurtured this conference, the Weatherby family and its company has undertaken the responsibility of the stud book all these years. Johnny Weatherby, in my opinion, has been an able and competent chairman of this committee for over 20 years. So I'd like to acknowledge, Paul, if you would take back the fond feelings for the Weatherby family and the deep appreciation of the way that they have fostered and protected and guided and been dedicated to the stud book committee as the Romanet family has been to this conference. I've mentioned and begun to mention several times our similarities and our differences. It's always intrigued me. I came to this sport from the outside. I was an outsider. And at our core, this is a very simple sport. You line up a group of horses evenly. No horse ever gets a head start, no matter of pedigree, no matter of price. They race to the same line. We even take a picture, and the winner gets the prize. We all share these basics. Most of us, not all in this room, but most of us also share some type of breeding industry. And the breeding industry at its core is also very simple. It is an agricultural enterprise. Horses mate, they're born, they're raised in generally an agricultural environment. Pretty simple. However, when it comes to the administration and regulation of racing, things get a lot more complicated quickly. Some of you own and control your own racetracks. Some of you don't. Some of you control your own race schedule. Some of you don't. Some of you have had total controls over what your rules are, the enforcement of those rules. Some of you have limited involvement in the rules. Some of you have no involvement in the rules. Some of you are appointed or elected by private sector groups involved in racing. Some of you are elected by public sector groups. Some of you are virtually free of government regulation. Some of you have substantial government regulation, and some of you in between. Virtually all in this room are subject to various tax rates that potentially can be very onerous and prevent capital reinvestment. Some of you own and control your own wagering systems. Some of you control your own laboratories. Others outsource. Some of you have total control over the drug testing in your jurisdiction. Some do not. Some are involved in your country's stud book. Some are not. And of course, the list goes on and on and on. Sometimes even countries are different, have different sections inside the same country. Coming from the United States, as I learned all of these various realities around the world, I became very envious, quite frankly, of most of your situations. Those countries that had total control over all aspects of administration of racing, I was extremely envious of. I would dream of what could be accomplished quickly if we just had all aspects of the process under one umbrella. I live in a very difficult country as it relates to the administration of racing. We are a large country geographically compared to most. The distance between Los Angeles, California and New York City is 1,000 miles longer than the distance between London and Moscow. We have 37 different racing jurisdictions, all at the state level. Every regulator in the country is a government appointee, yes, appointed by 37 different governors of the various states. And it's not uncommon for these appointees to have the legal stipulation that they can have no involvement in the industry in order to avoid a conflict of interest, which is good. But a conflict of interest, a lack of a conflict of interest, also means no expertise. We have too many laboratories, many of them underfunded. We have the largest foal crop in the world, and yet, except for central Kentucky, they are scattered throughout the country. We have the largest number of races also scattered throughout the country. We do have one stud book, thank goodness. I could go on, but I'm sure you get the drift and can understand why I am so envious of many of your situations. As I rattled off my litany, my guess is that many of you were categorizing your own country. We all share some basics, and we all differ in how we go about it. One of the beauties of this conference is that we should learn from each other and take the best ideas home with us. I think it's also relevant to step back and realize that we're not alone in our journeys on the challenges of modern sports administration. If you were to attend a similar conference today for any other major sport in the world, there would be many of the same issues that we are discussing. We should reach out and learn from other major sports. You needn't feel alone because every major sport is facing many of the same hurdles that we are, whether that be appropriate rules and what are they and how should they be enforced and what should the penalties be, to certainly a new issue of this generation, the health and safety and well-being of the athlete. And the list goes on and on. I also firmly believe that it is absolutely essential that we stay connected with each other. No true long-term progress can be made if we isolate any country. It's not constructive to make an island of any country in this racing world. Progress is made when we follow the advice of Christopher Weatherby. We should see and understand each other's point of view. It was good advice in 1978, and it's good advice in 2013. That doesn't mean that we need to agree on every single point, but we must respect each other's realities. One reality that most of us share is the increased competition for the entertainment and gaming market. Our sport was once a monopoly. We have lost that position forever. The modern racing executive has a much harder task to grow and even maintain the fan base than just a generation ago. The challenges faced by today's racing executive are more complex, demanding than those of previous generations. There are many bright spots to be sure. The marquee meets throughout the world provide modern sports thrill equal to any. The top races continue to thrive and appeal to a diverse and solid demographic. The electricity of the large crowds on big days, such as we all experienced yesterday, is convincing. Our sport can have a bright future with an expanding fan base of all ages. I have witnessed it daily at Keeneland. Bright, sophisticated, avid sports fans are excited and enthralled with thoroughbred racing at its best. Keeneland and some of the other top racetracks around the world are breaking attendance records annually, most anchored by these special events. Kentucky annually sees this evidence with the Kentucky Derby, as wonderful crowds enjoy a spectacular experience comparable to any in sport. You have equally valid examples in your own country's carnivals, festivals, and marquee events. They are undisputable evidence that we have the potential for a bright future. But we must be honest with ourselves. This same excitement is not at the average weekday race card. We cannot continue doing exactly what we have done for years and survive, much less prosper, in this modern competitive entertainment and sports environment. The young sports fan have at their disposal so much more. We must adapt to our new reality and this new environment quickly. The marquee events serve as an entranceway to introduce people to racing, and we must provide them with a product and an experience that will convert this one-day experience into a routine, important part of their ongoing sports and entertainment life. Very easy for me to say up here, I understand that. Much easier said than done. The new fan is discriminating, intelligent, well-rounded, and they demand certain standards of their sport, whichever sport they choose to follow. They will not accept many of the things that their grandparents would have. This reality is not unique to us. You can see it clearly in what other major sports are currently demanding of their administrators. They are confronting openly problems that for years have been swept under the carpet. We are all familiar with examples. Major sports are appropriately grappling with issues that they previously ignored because their fans are demanding it. The issues vary by sport, but in each instance, they are what becomes threshold issues. Issues that will be critical to keeping current fans and growing a new generation of fans. So just as other sports are examining themselves, so must racing. We are not unique here, but we're also not immune. Let me quickly say just 3 examples of threshold issues that the modern fan will demand of us before they embrace our sport. We must have integrity in our wagering systems and our statistics. The internet-savvy new fan will insist that the highest level of protection for our wagering system and absolute dependability of our statistics. Betting scandals, especially those made possible through weakness in our technology, will not be accepted by the internet generation. The statistical nature of wagering on racing is one of our greatest strengths, but we also must examine new ways to collect new types of statistics, as virtually every other modern sport is currently doing. We must also have total integrity in our rules, the enforcement of our rules, and the penalties if you break those rules. Every sport is reevaluating how it is conducted and how it can adapt to the modern media and modern lifestyles. So must we. Our rules need to make sense, our enforcement must be logical and transparent, and our penalties appropriate. The safety of our athlete, both jockey and horse, must be always our #1 priority. Modern sports fans understand that there is an acceptable level of danger between sports involving speed and proximity. However, if they are not convinced that we are doing everything possible to prevent horse breakdown and jockey injuries, they will reject us with a passion, and so they should. Proper and sensible progress on these issues, types of threshold issues, will appeal to our new fans. They are actually only the beginning, though, as we all know. All the best marketing and all the modern facilities and all the rest of the package that make up the formula to appeal to the modern sports enthusiast needs this foundation on which to grow. I have great confidence in the people in this room and your colleagues around the world. Racing executives are equal to those of any other sport, and most are more passionate about their sport. The big days can provide an entranceway, and if they like what they see, there should be no reason that racing cannot turn the casual one-time participant into a true racing fan. We must do our part with competitive administration, modern facilities, exciting experiences, and I have no doubt that we can do that. During my reflection of this past year, as I was meandering through my own personal journey, I kept returning to principles and clear themes and came to realize that these principles are much more relevant than any single issues. 33 years have taught me that single issues, even important ones, they come and they go. What we must always do is keep in mind that it is most important that we work together and that we always look for a way to build bridges among ourselves and not walls between ourselves. The sport and the industry that stems from this sport create a very special way of life, and it needs to continue. There is indeed a special culture that surrounds these oh-so-special horses, and this way of life is worth fighting for, so that future generations will know what we know. In closing, here is the most important lesson that I have learned over 33 years. In the areas that matter the most, I am convinced that the ties that bind us together are much stronger and much greater than those things that separate us. Our passion for the sport and our fondness for and confidence in our own opinions sometimes get in the way. But at our core, we all and we always should be one. And so as I leave you, my most heartfelt wish for this special industry is that you, from all over this world, may always find a way to come together through mutual respect and lead this great sport to the bright and successful future that it deserves. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Nick, for this very passionate presentation and very interesting presentation. Now, because you've been very quiet, I will give you a 5 minutes break, tea break, instead of the 15 minutes planned, only 5 minutes. So please be there, and then we will have our final session on communication, marketing, and branding, chaired by Jim. And I will ask Jim and his 3 speakers to be ready in 5 minutes.